What's up, guys? Welcome back. This is MisfitTV, your destination for entertainment and sports talk. I'm Jake. This is my guy, Jay, and we got a good show in store for you guys. We will be discussing the return of the NBA, Russell Westbrook's partnership with the NBA Players Association, and last but not least, we'll be looking at some role players that could really determine their team's fate as we go forward with the bubble. So let's just kind of get right into it, Jay. What are your thoughts on the NBA returning? What do you think the biggest storyline will be as we are starting to see scrimmages that have started this past week? What do you think are going to be some big headlines?
So I think the first thing, right, when we talk about like the scrimmages is obviously like this is the first time that these guys have seen live action since March. Like we can't really downplay the fact that you know, I'll go outside and haven't played basketball in a week and shoot bricks for an hour the first time I come back. So yeah, these are professionals, but at the end of the day, these are still guys that, have to kind of, get their court legs back essentially. So I think it's going to be huge to see how things go when they get back on the court in terms of these scrimmages. I think one of the big headlines, I guess you could say, will be how do the Lakers approach the start to the 8-game regular season once things start to really get the ball rolling, because sitting in first place right now, it's an 8-game regular season. So in comparison to some of the other teams behind them, like Houston, the LA, in terms of the Clippers, and also the Nuggets, who are like also very close in terms of being in a 3 spot. These are different teams that have a little bit more to lose in terms of needing home court. Denver is one that relies on their home court in terms of being able to succeed versus how they play on the road. Houston, they're already at a little bit of a disadvantage, and I'm probably going to touch on that a little bit later on, but they're already a little bit at a disadvantage in terms of going up against big teams like the Lakers to a certain extent. So I feel like the way the Lakers decide to feel out this coming back to the season, do they decide that they want to go hard for locking up the number 1 seed? Do they want to just get an understanding of who their lineup is going to be, considering Avery Bradley's not coming back and Rondo will be out for a couple of weeks? Like, that's the thing that people are really, including myself, really are going to want to see, is what approach do they decide to go with, considering like the other big X factor and all of that in terms of their return is LeBron James is in year 17. I know it's been a couple months, so it's kind of like slid under the radar a little bit. But like, if anything, that Kimbo Slice beard only makes him look older than he was before the season started. So like, it's gonna be a real big question in terms of how they decide to do things. Did you have any like specific team or any like specific headlines you thought you think are gonna be like super huge coming back?
I'm interested to see in the effect that COVID has on the gameplay and like what happens, because they did just come out with a report within the past couple of days that's saying that there were no COVID positive tests since they've arrived in Orlando, which is a great sign for the NBA. But I'm interested to see like how many teams will kind of like experiment without certain guys in their lineups or stuff like that. And like I'm interested to see how many teams like what kind of effort they put forth in the 8-game season, because like you said, like teams like the Lakers and Bucks have a pretty comfortable lead given that there's only 8 games left. So maybe you don't want to play them the entire time. Like your stars, you could probably rest them a little bit, but then again, they haven't played in 4 months, so they're bound to be a bit rusty. And then I'm really interested to see how the seeding works at the bottom of each division or a conference, just because it's a close race, especially out west. You got guys like Justice Winslow, who is out for the season. That was announced. He hurt his hip or something like that, so that really hurts the Grizzlies, who are trying to cling on to that 8th spot.
Yeah, and I think the big thing too with, looking at that bottom half of the race, it's like, we've been talking about these teams all year. I mean, Trailblazers struggling due to injury. Now they come back fully healthy. What's their mindset? I was listening to an NBA podcast with Sam Facini on it, and his thought process on the Trailblazers is Damian Lillard's going to come back and try to kill everything. And honestly, I don't blame him for thinking that, because Dame's main thing when this whole bubble thing came, to play in terms of it being brought to the table, his first thought process and the first thing he sent out was, I'm not playing any games if they don't mean anything. Now he's in a position to make every game count. I feel like he's the type that's going to take advantage of that and kind of like put the world on notice a little bit. Because, he didn't get – whether we liked it or not, he didn't get named to the 2K cover for no reason. He's no slouch at all. These other teams like the Pelicans who, of course, ever since Zion came back has been the buzz of the West for the most part. Memphis is pretty much, unfortunately, the team with the most to lose. If you really think about it and put it in perspective, they're the team that's a year or two too early in most people's minds. They're the team that's caught everybody by storm to the point that you wonder whether or not it was a flash in the pan situation or if they truly earned it. And I feel like, these 8 games, I don't think they're going to define whether or not whether or not Memphis was meant to be here. They had great games against, now mentioned it, Houston and other things like that during the regular season. But the wonder is going to be, did they earn this? This is a flash in the pan. Are they going to be able to prove that 8 spot is theirs, or are they going to let it be up for grabs for somebody else? Yeah, it's crowded down there.
Portland, playoff Dame is a different animal. He's had 4 months to get in that mindset where he understands what the stakes are for these final 8 games of the regular season. I think he is gonna, you remember last year, LeBron said, my playoff mode has been activated early this year, and then the Lakers missed the playoffs. I don't see that with Dame. I do not see that with the Trailblazers. I think they're going to come out fast from the start, and I just don't think they're going to look back. I think I wouldn't even be surprised if we saw them jump up from the 8th seed. I know they have a little bit of a steep hole, so that might be a little bit much, but I really am confident in their ability to snag that 8th seed. So recently, Russell Westbrook, his clothing brand, has partnered with the NBA Players Association, and they are going to start producing shirts that have messages that the NBA did not approve for the back of players' jerseys. What are your thoughts on that? Do you think it's a good look for the NBA, a bad look? What do you think?
So I feel like categorizing it as good or bad makes it feel like somebody's views is skewed towards one direction. And I don't feel like this is one of those circumstances where it needs to really be labeled as anything in particular. I think the big thing that needs to be taken away from it, honestly, besides, of course, the social justice practice that they're trying to implement, I think the other thing is you have to look at it from a business perspective. Honestly, I feel like it's kind of huge that, an NBA player is being able to use a conglomerate like the National Basketball Player Association in order to not only kind of uplift their own brand, but use it to stand for something. We've had the I Can't Breathe t-shirts in the past. We've had, guys, over the course of time, basically having their own shoe deals and things like that. But I feel like this ability for Westbrook to branch out, and, he's already a pretty, fashionable guy, I would say, in terms of how he carries himself, similar to his teammate James Harden. But I think that this is a sphere for players that I feel like they've never really truly explored. Every NBA player, or I would say dang near every athlete, has the idea of, wanting their own shoe or something of that sort. But, I feel like Westbrook's taking it a step further. I think in terms of the social activism stance on it, it depends on how you want to view it. Guys like LeBron James, Anthony Davis, Dwight Howard have already kind of decided that they're not going to put other epithets on the back of their jerseys. They feel as though their name represents them and their beliefs to its fullest extent, and, power to them and all that. But there are other guys who feel different and are open to, experimenting with this idea of being able to still support in a different way. So, big ups to Westbrook. I feel like it's definitely him putting himself out there and also trying to do something noble. But I don't think it's a game changer. I just think it gives players another avenue from a business standpoint more than anything.
Yeah, and it's like you mentioned, it's like it's in the game that they are wearing like statements on the back of their jerseys, so it kind of gives them another platform to share their beliefs, because they obviously aren't. I mean, they could actually show up to games in the shirts that don those unapproved messages. But I think it's like a really good look for not only Russ, but for the Players Association to kind of show that they do have a say in this, and just because the NBA didn't approve some of their messages, like they still have freedom of speech. And so if a name is going to get rejected because they're nationally televising the games, I mean, I understand that. I think it's already great that the NBA is allowing players to have certain statements on the back of their jerseys. I think that's a really good move. It shows player empowerment and shows that they care about making a difference. I think it's a really good opportunity for players to kind of get notoriety off the court for those issues. It's like it's building off of you've. I don't know if you've seen. I think it was Jeremy Grant and a couple of other players in their recent post-practice like press conferences. They've actually like worked into every single answer. Like, yeah, practice was good, but we need to do this. We need to arrest the cops that killed Breonna Taylor. We need to fight for social reform, stuff like that. And this is just another avenue that lets them do that. I think it's really good. I would like to see. I would honestly like to see Russ kind of come out and say he's donating some portion of it to like platforms and organizations that are actually fighting these like social boundaries that are in place, because I think that would also be a really good look.
I mean, I feel like the biggest thing, like you said beforehand, is where they take it. You know what I mean? Like, that's why I said I feel like it's a win, but you don't really want to mark it as that because it almost feels too soon. You know what I mean? I feel like what he's doing from a business venture standpoint is huge. I feel like in a player, athlete, business mogul, you know, stance. But in terms of the social injustices and things like that, I think the biggest step will come from what these products do, you know, off the court. Yes, they allow these players to be able to represent exactly how they feel, not how they were monitored to be able to display their feelings in terms of, you know, what was and wasn't approved. But I think that, you know, things like proceeds and things like that that you were mentioning, and donations, and, you know, just overall, even the stuff in terms of the press conferences and speaking out on certain things, I feel like the keeping the foot on your neck approach to these issues and stuff is what's really gonna matter, because that's what, you know, all the news outlets and stuff are talking about when they refer to the NBA returning and whether or not it's a good look or not, or whether or not it's a good idea. It really is going to come down to how, you know, attached they are to their beliefs in conjunction to playing the game of basketball. If they're able to juggle them both, there's a lot less to say and there's a lot less to scrutinize. And if they're unable to, there's going to be questions as to whether or not individuals are hypocrites, you know, whether or not they truly believe in the things they're standing for, whether or not they're potential fads. And I don't think any of these players feel that way. And that's why I hope that, you know, they take the necessary steps to really push this mentality and this kind of brotherhood around this problem, like, forward for the long haul going into the postseason.
Yeah, I've been pleasantly surprised. I thought that like as soon as the players got to the bubble, I thought that it was just gonna be like the news or like sports outlets would be just infiltrated with stuff like life around the bubble, like, oh look, so and so is just hanging out at the pool, or they went fishing today. You see some of that stuff, but then you also see the social activism stuff, which is a really good look. I mean, like you said, it's really good that that's still getting attention, because that's really what's important. That was the cause. That was the reason that some players were thinking about dropping out. And so it's really good that they still have that attention, focusing towards the issues that actually matter, not that so and so caught whatever kind of fish or stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, I mean, the biggest thing is maintaining focus. That's what they said they wanted to be able to do, and that's what their primary concerns were in terms of coming back. That's what certain players' primary concerns still are in terms of deciding whether or not they want to return or not. So I think the fact that this is getting pushed as far as possible or as much as they possibly can, I think is a good sign for sure.
Of course. So now I want to transition to the final topic, which is what players do you think can really turn into X factors for their team and really push them over the edge and like help them exceed expectations? Like, who are guys that you think have the potential to be game changers?
So I got one young guy and one older guy. From the young guy perspective, the player I chose was Bam Adebayo for the Miami Heat. I think that he is a big factor as to whether or not the Miami Heat are able to, get past even the second round. I think in terms of, I feel like in the first round they're definitely going to be in a dogfight regardless of who kind of secures it. But I feel like being able to move further throughout the playoffs will depend on a guy like him. Jimmy Butler is proven. We've seen it in Minnesota. The one year he was able to uplift them to the playoffs. We've seen what he did for the 76ers. He's, one of the most underrated players in the league as far as I'm concerned in terms of being a two-way wing that really holds teams down and hold them accountable. But Bam Adebayo, this was his first year being an All-Star, and I think with this postseason coming up, this gives him a chance to feel himself a little bit more. It's already a big accomplishment, similar to Jason Tatum, who started getting buckets after the All-Star game. I think that Bam and his ability to step up and elevate to that title of being an all-star now is really going to be what pushes them over the top. They have Goran Dragic, they have Tyler Hero, they have Duncan Robinson, guys who can shoot the heck out of the ball. They have Jimmy Butler holding things down in terms of being a closer for them and just being an overall kind of voice in the locker room. I mean, they have a squad. They're not screaming names in terms of guys you might like want to draft in like a My Team or 2K or anything. But like for the most part, they are a well-built squad and a well-driven organization with Spoelstra at the homes. So at the helm of things, so, I mean, it's huge.
They're definitely one of the more well-rounded teams that are in this that are going to make the playoffs. And if you look at it, like he just has that playoff mindset, you know. I mean, you heard him. He left Philly, or he forced his way out. He did a sign-in trade to get to Miami, and then later came out and said that he left Philly because some of those guys didn't have that championship mindset. Like, that just shows you the kind of player he is, and he's got that outcast mindset where he isn't there for fun and games. Like, he's a winner. He is there to prove himself. He's there to win. And I would love to see a Philly versus Miami first round matchup. I think that would be really entertaining, and I think it would be an awesome series.
And I feel like the big thing about a series like that is, that matchup between Bam and Joel Embiid would be huge. Not only in terms of like the names themselves, but the matchup itself is going to be a deciding factor in who wins the series. Because Joel Embiid having a hard series is not good for the Sixers, who outside of Ben Simmons doesn't really have a player that's really consistent. And Ben Simmons does not shoot the ball. He's swearing up and down that coming out of this NBA bubble, he might actually shoot threes. But he told us that earlier in the season and only shot one and made it. So it goes to tell you what it is. But I want to touch off your championship mindset take in terms of why he left the 76ers and kind of transition that to like the older player that I chose, and that being PJ Tucker. Has he been on any teams that I would define as like being, championship rosters outside of the Rockets? Not necessarily. He was on squads like Phoenix and stuff in the past when they were kind of trying to get it together still. But I think the big thing with PJ Tucker is, his ability to play the center position for this Rockets team as a 6'5" guy listed. I checked in on Basketball Reference earlier today. He's listed as a shooting guard, a small forward, and a power forward. But he's playing center. So I have big concerns about that in terms of him being able to go against teams like the Lakers, who have crazy rotations of big men between JaVale McGee, obviously Anthony Davis, and Dwight Howard. I mean, even the Clippers, they have Ivica Zubac, and they have Montrezl Harrell down low. That's going to be a serious issue. I would even take Jokic over a guy like him if I can, if they match up with one another. So I think the biggest thing for him is how active he is on the defensive end as an anchor for them down low will really determine where the Rockets are able to go, because they can score with the best of them, but if they can't stop anybody, they're gonna have a rough time.
I'm going to take that and I'm going to go one step further. And I'm going to say that if the Rockets are successful with PJ Tucker at the 5, we're going to see a revolutionary change within the NBA. Like what you saw with like the Celtics introducing the fast break, where teams automatically had to get acclimated to it. They had to adjust their roster, get more in shape. Like if this small ball thing works and they can still flourish with a 6'5" guy, because like, look, I'm 6'4". I understand I'm not an NBA player, but I would be mortified to go up against Anthony Davis in a 7-game series. Like I don't understand. Like if the Rockets or Jokic or Rudy Gobert or anyone of that's a center power forward, like PJ Tucker, I don't have a lot of confidence in him because he's 6'5". I think he's a good player. But if you just look at the firepower of the big men in the West and even in the East too, like I don't know how well he'll be able to stand his ground. But if this works, we've got a new brand of basketball. I think we're going to see a lot more teams that are sliding their 4s or maybe even their 3s down to the 5 position to kind of match up with the small ball teams. And then I still think dominant big men are going to be a problem, but I think teams are going to be able to find ways around it.
I mean, I feel like they already sort of have. I mean, the center position is already slowly being phased out, letting a 6'5" guy hold the reins down. Man, you are talking about some scary basketball down the line. I think we might not have a guy taller than 6'8" playing any position unless they want to be just a straight rim runner. So it's going to be scary to see what they do and how they imprint their style on the game this postseason.
And it'll be interesting to see how well the Rockets can adjust to that, because they did have Clint Capella, who I think was injured for a bit of the season, but he eventually got traded right at the trade deadline, which was just a month before the NBA suspended the season. So I don't know how much time that really gave the Rockets to figure the whole small ball thing out. I don't know how much time they've been given to kind of figure that stuff out. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, definitely. Did you have anybody in mind in terms of like an X factor this postseason?
So I'm going with another center who I don't know how they'll hold up, kind of like with PJ Tucker. I'm gonna say Yusuf Nurkic on the Trailblazers. Hasn't played a single minute this season because he injured himself last year. He was supposed to play literally like the day or two after the NBA suspended their season, which just gives him more time to heal. But like he put up really good numbers before his injury. He's a really solid center. I think maybe Portland should even try to experiment with a lineup, like an ultra big lineup. I don't think it would be able to work against a small ball team, because I don't see you being able to match up Hassan Whiteside with PJ Tucker and not having you get wrecked up top. But I think if you can roll with Nurkic at the 4, Whiteside at the 5, you're pretty much getting every rebound. That's a team that I could see stacking up against LeBron and AD. Like if you have Nurkic guard AD, and then that leaves Hassan Whiteside to guard McGee or Howard or whoever they have starting, that would be a really good series. And that's what it looks like could happen if Portland grabs the 8 seed. But I think it just depends on how Nurkic looks. I think we are definitely going to get a better look at that before the playoffs come. Hopefully we see them in the playoffs. I think that would be really good basketball. But yeah, that's one of mine. And then another one that I have is Jaylen Brown. he often gets overlooked in Boston because they have Tatum and Smart and Kemba and Gordon Hayward. So he kind of falls out of the loop, but he's quietly putting up really good numbers this year. And I think if he can continue his production, teams aren't gonna like that's another kind of brand of small ball. Um, I think who are the Celtics starting centers like Daniel Tice or Ennis Cantor, who aren't the biggest guys. So I'd call them small ball, especially if they have Tatum at the four, because I've always thought of him as a small forward. Um, but I know that he's been playing a lot of four this season, so I think it'll be really interesting to see how Jaylen Brown, what effect he can have on the Celtics.
I mean, to respond to both of those, one thing that you also have to take into account too with Nurkic is like, he's their best screener. I mean, when it comes to the game of basketball, a lot of people do not focus on setting screens, pick and roll, things like that, unless somebody's picking and popping and shooting threes. But Nurkic is one of those guys that does dirty work. He has gotten 20 rebounds before. Like, you can't, undermine the fact that as a rebounder, he's relatively elite. But as a screener, though, I think the big thing for them is a lot of their guys in the backcourt like to create off the dribble. That's where all their points come from, whether we like it or not. Dame, CJ, Anthony Simons coming off the bench, Gary Trent Jr., who's had a sneaky good year for them. They're all guys that will be able to create from behind the three-point line, either attack or they are not scared to pull that thing from 30-plus feet. So, I mean, when you put that into perspective, them having their best screener back is somebody that it gives them a lot of versatility in terms of how many ways and how many people can score from the top of the key. But the other thing is, it takes pressure off of a guy like Hassan Whiteside, who is relatively questionable in terms of how much he may be able to produce come playoff time when the stakes are a lot higher. I mean, we haven't seen him with the Heat play in the playoffs very often, and when he has, I wouldn't use the word dominant at all.
Yeah.
Not to say that Nurkic has either, but being able to give them multiple looks gives them a lot of, directions that they can go in terms of being able to compete with the bigger teams, like you said. In terms of Jaylen Brown, the dude just got paid, man. Like, before this season started, the dude got his extension and started dancing in the rain and let the whole world know that he is going to be a problem. And so far this year, like you said before, he gets kind of overlooked by the fact that, like, obviously Jason Tatum is on the ascension. Gordon Hayward, when he's, like, fully healthy, is one of the scariest forwards in the league. Kemba Walker is basically the same thing as having Kyrie Irving, but just an inch or two shorter. Like, these are guys that essentially, pop off the page. And Jaylen Brown being the third overall pick from Cal, the guy who nobody really expected to be taken that high and wondered why the Celtics took him that high. He's been on a mission for a while to prove it. And this season, he's already, starting to prove doubters wrong by the day. So I really think that, with a new contract, a newfound confidence in terms of the team truly believing in him on a long-term standpoint, things like that, I feel like he's going to show out. And I feel like that's a great take on your end in terms of picking a guy like that, because that dude right there, man, he comes to play down the stretch. And I think that's the most interesting part about them, because they have a lot of versatility in terms of their lineup, especially with guys like Marcus Smart and players like that who are committed to the defensive end. But Jaylen Brown is not some defensive stopper or anything. Like, this guy can get 15 to 20 on a nightly basis when given the opportunity. So I feel like he's going to be a scary one for sure.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Make sure you all tune in next week. We will finally have some basketball games and analysis for you guys that we can talk about and give you our opinions on what the first week of scrimmages was like. This has been the Buckets Only podcast. I'm Jake, that's Jay, and we'll see you all next week.